Hello, hello. Welcome to another conversation around the overflowing life for business leaders and entrepreneurs. Um, we were just kind of chatting before we got started, Adrian, that you had a fun day and you called me sir, and I said, don't do that. And here we are.
It's so funny how different semantics bubble up in different households. Sir,
Um, yeah. So we're here to talk about identity today. So this is the seventh episode in our series, and what we're tackling this season is, hey, there's a problem, right? We have a problem in the working world as business owners and leaders, and the problem is our souls are being sucked away by hurry, by digital distraction, by this thing. I saw an article recently called talked about workism, which is like looking to, actually this is very appropriate, looking to work and your career to define your identity, and how that is dangerous. Now, the article actually, I don't think it had very good answers to that, to be honest with you. And I think we're going to get into a little bit more about identity today for sure. But that's what we're tackling. And today we're going to talk about identity. And Adrian, I'd love to hear real quick from you, before you and I started talking about this topic. If somebody brought up identity, what did you think about that? Like, what comes to your mind?
I think identity is very personal. I believe that we all can evolve with our identity. I think about my own identity and the different roles that I play, and even as I've reached midlife this year, how my identity has shifted over the years too. So when people talk about identity, it's a really important construct to understanding who are you and how do you show up in the world and how do you want to show up in the world.
Hmm. I've heard midlife referred to it being like you're back in middle school. And I kind of
Interesting.
feel that way. In a little.
Tell me more about
You
that.
know, in middle school, I think I shared this in one of the previous episodes. Like, I went through some identity crises. I went from, like, kind of a nerd to like kind of preppy, and then landed on skater, where I still am now. Those of you watching the videos, I have gauged earrings and whatever. And so still listen to punk rock music on the daily. And, it was like, okay. And it's kind of like that now. Not that I'm completely redefining my identity. I'm more refining it, and that's part of what I'll share tonight is or today, the process that I've been through. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how life goes in circles, or not circles but cycles, where I feel like we kind of operate, at least for me, I've operated in these identities, and then it's been further refined, further refined, further refined for me anyway. How about you?
When we were preparing for this, I was actually thinking about how identity shows up, how we try on different identities based on our circumstances. And I have one child who is in middle school and one in high school, and the journey that I have observed for them. Yeah, just what you said. It's they are trying to figure out who are they in context of their social circle, how are they going to show up, how are they going to be a friend, how are they going to be a sibling. So as they explore their identity in middle school and high school, I really can relate to that actually in midlife of who am I now as I'm going through several life transitions and identifying the parts of me that truly are kind of evergreen about my identity, but as you said, refining it too.
Hmm. Yeah, and as leaders, business owners, man, if we don't really know who we are and the components of our identity, that's going to really impact our business. I fully believe your business grows to the extent that you do. And I also believe that identity is not, and self-awareness, which is our next episode, and they are different. They play with each other a little bit, but they're different. That identity and self-awareness are ever evolving. They never stop. Right? You never arrive with those things. You're always learning more about who you are. And so let's jump into how it's generally defined. And so as I was preparing for this as an Enneagram 5, I love to dive deep, and appreciate my co-hosts work and helping me like whittle away the copious amounts of information I could lay on everybody that's most people won't care about. But in Psychology Today, I saw that they had said identity includes the many relationships people cultivate, such as their identity as a child, as a friend, as a partner, as a parent, Right? So you've got identities in those roles. It involves external characteristics over which a person has little or no control, such as height, race, socioeconomic class. Identity also encompasses political opinions, moral attitudes, religious beliefs, all of which guide the choices one makes on a daily basis. And, I think I would just simply define identity as the core essence of your being, the truest reflection of who you are, rooted deeply in love and secure in your intrinsic worth and value. And actually, I have to credit Jamie Winship, who we're going to talk to in an upcoming episode about identity. That would be actually, I asked him, I was like, hey, how do you define identity? You're kind of a guru to me on identity. And so, again, it's the core essence of your being, the truest reflection of who you are, rooted deeply in love and secure in your intrinsic worth and value. What would you add or change about that, Adrian?
It's nuanced and there's a lot of onion layers there. And I think it usually takes people a lot of time to embrace their identity. A lot of times, people, society tell us that we have to be a certain way or that we have to show up a certain way. We have to be more of this, we have to be less of that. And so there are a few people that I have met who really feel confident in their identity and are just unapologetic about how they show up and who they are. So I also think that exploring your identity, as you said, it's an ongoing process. It's kind of like climbing a mountain that we're never going to reach the top of. There's always more to dive deep into. So it's definitely a process and a journey. And I think one has to be willing to embrace it and to look at both the positive and the less positive aspects if we really want to be healthy whole people. And as
Hmm.
leaders, I think you want to be healthy whole people.
Yes. Well, and the healthier, wholer, more integrated you are, uh, the better leader you will be. Which, again, we're going to
Right.
talk a lot about that in this episode and next episode. And look, it's my personal belief that we are all created uniquely, that there's never been anybody like us in all space, time, and history. However many people came before us, there's never been anybody like us. There will never be anybody like us after this. Even if they look exactly like us, their experiences, their perspectives are going to be different. And so, because of that, our identity is a filter through which I believe, we bring the gifts of who we are to the world around us. We each have a gift or many gifts to share with others, to make this place better. And if we're not clear on what that is, the world is missing out on that, especially as leaders. And, look, nothing against politics, I suppose, but man, it's not we clearly need leaders who know who they are to stand up in the political realm to say, look, public opinion aside, to a degree, this is like who I am, and here's how I want to see the world made better. And as leaders, we better know our who we are. And so when it comes to what is identity, I think about what is it not. Right. So it's we already kind of alluded to it. It is not what you do for work. And, when you meet people, what do you do? That's the first thing you ask. So, which makes you think like, okay, well, that is where my identity is tied to, and that will let you down for a lot of reasons, but it's not what you do for work. Right.
Yeah. And when you are doing the same work or working at the same organization for so long, I think it's hard to untangle that because eventually you become what you do. And so, how do we, once we have assumed that identity of being so intertwined with the work that we do, how do we really separate ourselves from that and explore who we are without that position or without that title or without that environment?
Hmm. Well, and I think it starts with an understanding that you are not what you do what you are. Right. So it's you had said, if can repeat the words you said exactly, it was like, look, you do a career so long, you do something so long, you start to become that. And I would suggest that and this is a privileged statement, meaning most people around the world don't necessarily get to equate identity with career for the most part, right? And
Right.
yet, for the people that are probably listening to this, they probably are able to. And as leaders, the leaders that we're speaking to, I want you to understand that, hey, part of your career is part of who you are, but it's a part, not the whole. So
Right.
starting from the mindset that I am not what I do, but I do what I am, is a great place to say, okay, let me start to discover what I am and how what I do fits into that, and that untangling that kind of maybe tied up knot in a little bit, right?
Conscious uncoupling.
Yeah, that's a good term. That's a good term. It's
Well, when
Go
also,
ahead.
if I may add, also when we know who we are as leaders and we know what our strengths and our talents and even our liabilities are, then we can step into those places of leadership. And it doesn't matter how long you've been there, whether you're new, whether you're a veteran, whether it's a new environment, a new team. If you're confident and you know what talents you bring as a leader, then you'll be more confident in who you are no matter what the environment is.
Yeah. And it's funny because this conversation's already kind of weaving in with self-awareness a lot. But again, they are different. And we'll get to that in a second. Um, Also, I would suggest that your identity is not what tribe or team you quote unquote play for, right? I'm a Phillies fan, Philadelphia Eagles fan. Unfortunately, Phillies lost last night. They left a lot of points on the playing field, but it is what it is. I'm not going to cry over it, but it's not like some cases I folks might call me a Christian. I don't necessarily identify with that because of some of the, I don't know, just I don't want to identify as a Jesus follower, and that's fine. But that's not my identity either, right? And it comes down to, who are you intrinsically? What are the experiences, the gifts, skills, talents that make you you? Like, how does that play into everything? And so, it's also not just your personality, right? It's not just your Enneagram type, especially Enneagram, because that's a transformational tool. It's not your Strengths Finder. It's not your DISC or your Myers Briggs. Those are all, it's like those are shards of a broken mirror, right? If you've ever seen, we just finished Harry Potter for the umpteenth time, and I think it's in the last movie or the second to last movie, where he's got this shard of glass and he keeps seeing a face in the mirror that's not his. But it's kind of like that. There's a bunch of shards of broken glass, and each one of those personality assessments tell you a little bit more about who you are. So
Yeah, they give you more clues, they give you more insight, they give you more understanding and more language. And when you take the composite of all those things, then you can really start to get a deep understanding of the things that make you tick, the things that trigger you, why you get out of bed in the morning. So those are all fantastic tools. But yes, I always want to make sure people know that those are just tools into understanding your identity, and that as complex human beings, there's so much more to us than whatever the results of those assessments are.
amen. I agree. So actually, it might be helpful for me to share with you all what my identity is. Now, identity is different than your purpose, right? Identity is kind of like who you are. It answers the question, who are you? Purpose answers, what are you going to do here? As does mission. And so my identity, there's two terms that I use for myself that I've worked on over years, decades, to kind of hone it and discover it. And there's processes that I'll share either here on the website about what those processes were. But builder of constructs and teaching prophet are those two terms. And simply put, as a builder of constructs and a teaching prophet, I work with people to create plans that help them discover their true selves. I also, as the teaching prophet, simplify life's challenges into clear truths, helping others find a more fulfilling life. And so that's my identity. Like, anything that doesn't match with that, it gives me that filter to know, hey, I'm not going to be doing that. So, and that's different than a mission statement that I have, which is to help people create, uh, uh, create really implement and pass on the overflowing or abundant life. And you can kind of see how those two play around with each other. So,
And that's so eloquently said, Chris. How long or at what point in your life did you get to that point where you could so fluently describe your identity? What types of processes did you have to go through to arrive there?
lots and lots of therapy. I'm kind of kidding, but not really. In my early 20s, I hit clinical depression for a while. I really didn't. It was it was kind of an identity crisis. There was some things that I felt were being worked out of me, pulled out of me, so I could be a more whole human being, such as I'm not good enough. And so I did go to therapy for that. I went to counseling, and then eventually I got involved with a men's ministry that helped me further refine it and define it. I went through sales training that kind of worked on that. It's kind of always, for the last probably 15 to 18 years, it's been in the back of my head. Who am I and why am I here? That's my four really coming out. And I was always refining that. And literally it's been, like I said, it's been 15, 16 years. And that recent iteration that I just read to you came through working with Jamie Winship and his company. I did a coaching session with him actually. And I was struggling with trying to put into words who I believed I was. And I told him my mission statement. He's like, well, that's a mission statement. That's not an identity. I'm like, oh, you're right. I guess so. And so I worked with him to kind of help uncover that. And really, honestly, he asked, we did some visualization exercises. He asked me a bunch of really good questions, and his identity is an untier of knots. So he untied the knot of my identity and did it very well. He also helped my wife with that in addition. So
That's
does that
beautiful.
help?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like I said, it's not, I prefer to say, you said it was like a mountain you never reach the top of. I prefer to say it's like a gift that you keep unwrapping, right? Like a
Sure.
nesting Russian dolls or whatever, right? It's like, to me, that feels better. It's like, oh, I'll never get to the
It's
top of the
like
mountain
Christmas
versus
morning every day.
right, exactly. I get to unwrap it, new layer every day, or an onion, but onions kind of make you cry and smell. So I'm not going to go with that one. So anything else you would add about, what it is not?
Sometimes society gives us these labels or expects us to be a certain identity that we're not. And if we're not aware enough to question that or reject it, I think that it can become part of us and maybe even become a confusing part of us. So I had the identity of pastor's wife for about 14 years. And I was pretty young when I was put into that role when my husband and I got married. And after a while, I really realized that I didn't feel like a pastor's wife. I didn't feel like I was supposed to, like I wasn't playing the role well enough. And after we left the church about 5 years ago, and I had some time to reflect on that and sort of untangle that, I realized that that was an identity that was expected of me, that I was supposed to fulfill. I was comparing myself to another pastor's wife who did the role wonderfully. I mean, she was created for that, and I couldn't live up to that. And so that that part of me of understanding who I am and who I am not, I think sometimes we have to really think about what are we being expected to be? Does that align with who we actually are? And if it's not, how are you going to process through that? And how are you really going to get to the root of who you are when society is telling you to be something?
So if you could go back, not quite 20 years, but let's say 19 or 18 years, and ask yourself some questions to kind of maybe help yourself realize, hey, I'm wearing somebody else's clothes here. It's not really my true identity. What questions might you ask yourself, Adrian, or have asked yourself?
Well, I think I would have started therapy earlier because I think therapists are really great at peeling back those layers and asking those
Yes.
questions. Something that I always had struggled with and still struggle with are comparing myself to others. And so I think the question that I may have asked myself is, why is it so important to be like this other pastor's
Mm.
wife? Why am I comparing myself to her? Who am I trying to please? What are the expectations that I'm trying to meet? And so trying to get really clear, as a young 20 something year old about what that role is. And I think I lacked a lot of confidence too into just being who I am, and instead of trying to please everybody. You can't be all things to all people. And sometimes when we try too hard, we kind of lose our sense of identity.
Mm. Yeah, I think about the tension that we feel like when you compare yourself to somebody else. It definitely, for me, I feel inferior. Right? There's this tension, these negative emotions, which when you say negative emotions, it's like, oh, I shouldn't have those emotions, and that's not really the right descriptor. But these not, they just don't feel good, and
Right.
they're that, it's that dashboard on the car, it's the lights going off saying you need to pay attention to this. And I when I coach folks, pay attention to those. I ask them, pay attention to those feelings, those tensions, and what is that about? And really dive into that. If you're living an identity that's not yours, there's probably tension and stress and discord in there, and pay
Absolutely.
attention to that.
Yeah. What is
So
that internal dissonance that's occurring? that might give you some
Mm.
clues into some struggles that you're trying to work out.
Yeah, and especially as leaders, knowing that unique identity, like we had just said earlier, is really important. In fact, there was an article by Dr. Bill Howlett in Forbes back in January of this year, 2023. I'll link to it in the show notes. That is all about your leadership identity matters, and he talks about how it deeply impacts your identity, deeply impacts your behavior, interpersonal skills, your emotional intelligence, attitudes, beliefs, and assumptions. And we'll talk about a study done by Green Peak Partners in collaboration with Cornell University next episode. But identity involves self-awareness, which is the one quality that was the strongest predictor of overall success in the study that they did. So obviously identity plays a huge role as in your success as a leader. And so when I mentioned the idea of workism, right? This thing that, and I cannot remember. I'll try to have to link to that in the show notes too. I can't remember who wrote it, but talking about work kind of being a religion. Instead of going to Sunday service, so to speak, or synagogue or mosque, we're going to work, and that's our community. That's where we get our identity. And especially in a hurried, digitally disconnected kind of world that we're in now, it's really important to know what we are apart from that. And it kind of, when we understand our identity apart from work, it will guide us, especially as I think these days, and I haven't seen a stat on this. I should probably look it up, but I think people have 2 or 3 careers throughout their lives. It used to be they'd be in one company forever, but now we tend to reinvent ourselves. And with the advent of AI coming and all that that's going to create, I'm sure it's going to allow for more fluidity in our careers. And so if you don't know who you are, you may choose jobs that don't really fit, or leadership roles that aren't the best for you. And so knowing it's going to help you know where to focus, like a filter, if you would.
Absolutely. And when you know who you are and what you need to thrive, then you can search for and advocate for good fit roles, good fit
Hmm.
jobs, positions, tasks, whatever that looks like. But you have to know what it is that aligns with what you bring to others, how you're going to show up as a team on a team, but also what do you need to thrive and be fulfilled. And you have to be real clear about who you are in order to advocate for that.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple other things that come with not dangers of not knowing your identity, which is, hey, you can get wrapped up in achievement and career and workaholism. And chasing success tends to be elusive. It's never quite enough. And I heard I was at a convention recently, and the speaker up front was talking about happiness versus hustle, and how when you put hustle ahead of happy, you never get to happy. Versus if you choose happy first, and then that defines your whole world, then your hustle can be great, but you always have happiness. And I equate that with success. It's like, look, you never get success is always more. You never quite get there. Versus when you have your identity, you can have that piece. Hey, here's who I am, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm carrying out my mission, if you will, and I get to filter everything through that. And if you're not aware of your identity, you also have the possible, the negative side of that is floating around and escaping from pain. Because if you're not in your identity and you don't know who you really are, what your gifts, skills, talents, what you bring to the world, there's probably tension there. And if you're not addressing it, you could tend to just, all right, I need to ignore it. I need to just completely get away from it.
Well, and maybe you turn to behaviors that you wouldn't normally turn to, numbing out, figuring out a coping mechanism that isn't so healthy just because you're trying to avoid, as you said, avoid pain or avoid actually doing the deep, hard work of understanding who you are at your core.
Hmm. Yeah. It's like kind of the opposite in my journey. My identity, I kind of refined it by understanding what the opposite of it was, meaning who is my false self? I even have a name for my false self, which I don't really want to say on the air, but it's not a nice word. And it's like, okay, I know when that guy shows up, I'm not in my identity. I'm shying away from the true work. And I'm like, okay, we talked about canaries before. That's a canary for me. When, this blank isolation boy shows up, it's like, okay, I gotta step into my true identity. And, naming that fault. I've had a few clients where it was helpful for them to name it, negative Nancy or whatever. And it's like, okay, when that person shows up, that you're not operating in your essence or your true self. So,
Yeah. Is there anything that triggers that for you?
oh, well, luckily I've seen a lot of growth around that, but for me lately, but one thing was somebody saying, well, yeah, losing control and certainty was one, right? We talked about that last time. And somebody saying, I need to talk to you without defining what they need to talk to me about because I go to a bad place and I'm like, oh, I want to withdraw. Lots of, um, how do I want to put this? Lots of unproductive people interaction, right? Like when I go to, and not that when I go to conventions, it's unproductive, but like, man, I am being with crowds of people does not energize me. So that is, I definitely am like, okay, I just got to watch my energy and make sure that I'm taking time to kind of recharge. And if I don't, and I'm starting to burn out, then I lose that negative side of me, false self shows up.
Yeah, brings
So
out the worst in you. Yeah, something I just latched onto that you said real briefly was when somebody
yeah.
asks to talk to you without giving you context about it. I think that is probably universally true for humans because
Mm,
if we don't know what it's about, we automatically assume, I'm in trouble. What did I do? Something bad is going to happen. So, as a leader, this is just like 2 cents of advice that I have learned as a leader is whenever I ask somebody, hey, can I talk to you tomorrow? Can I have 20 minutes? I always tell them why, because I don't want them to
yes.
spiral. It incites fear in them. So, just do your people a solid. And if you need to talk to them, just let them know why so they don't spiral.
Especially if you're the leader. Yeah, you're being called in the principal's office now.
Exactly.
How much
Not role
time
play.
are you going to need? It's a rule that I instituted last year. If somebody asks to speak to me, how much time do you need and what's the subject or the agenda? No, I've got to know those two things, and don't lie
Yeah.
to me, because if you show up and we do something completely different, that's not going to be good.
Yeah.
So
So little
let's
tangent from identity, but
no, really good tip. I appreciate you sharing that. So let's talk about discovering identity, right? And you'd kind of asked me a little bit about that earlier, but it's a personal journey, discovering who you are. And it's not usually something that's ever finished. Again, it's like that present you always unwrap. And there's I think it goes to some of the practices we talked about before. You've got to create space for reflection and solitude, silence, stillness, so that you have that time to reflect on, how you are actually feeling, what you thought about certain things, what your emotions were about. So it kind of starts with making sure you're leaving, um, space for you to be aware of that and work on that. And listen, it's not also something you're going to just come up with like that. I had a good friend that would say, if you don't know your purpose or identity or your big why, that is your purpose, is to discover it, which I
start
think is a
there.
great way to look at it. Right. Exactly. So, Adrian, when you think about where else you might start, what other tools and things do you think have you found useful in figuring out who you are and what makes you you?
Yeah. Two things that come to mind. One is notice when you start to feel a little jealous, good naturedly, or envious when you see somebody doing something, observing something that you wish you could be doing, because that might be a clue into understanding how am I wired? Why does that bring me joy? Why is it that I want to be doing what that person is doing? What is it about that? So to start to notice that, but then also to notice when you feel like you're in a state of flow doing something. What activities are you engrossed in where time just evaporates? It goes by so quickly, because that can also be a clue into understanding what brings you joy. Where are you naturally talented? Where do your strengths lie? And also help you to kind of peel back some of those onion layers of understanding your identity.
Hmm, that's good. And that's going to take awareness, right? Paying attention to
Awareness,
that
yeah,
of when
and
you're in flow.
time. Yeah, you kind of
Hmm.
have to put on these spidey senses on, right? To
Hmm.
notice when those things are happening too.
Yeah. I really love assessments. And as I said before, assessments aren't the end all be all. I heard Ian Morgan Cron, who's an Enneagram expert, say one time that all all typing systems are wrong, but they're useful. And so the way I interpret that is like DISC, Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinder, and Enneagram are all, they're useful, right? You don't want to put yourself in a box, right? There was a assessment that the company I worked for before used, and it was called the AVA, and people went around literally in the entire company, had 200,000 people in the company, would be like, well, they'd identify themselves by the 4-digit number that their AVA is, which they got rid of that just because people were putting themselves in a box, and they created their own. And there's no way to do that. There's 11 traits, and there's no numbers to refer to. And so I think it swung a little too far over to not identifying, because it is helpful to get some range. Like when you say, hey, I'm a Enneagram subtype, 1-to-1, if you know what that means, it's like, okay, I get the gist of you, quicker than if you sat down and shared for an hour. Right. But assessments are really a good tool to understand, like a disco ball, the various parts of you. So StrengthsFinder, DISC, the Big Five, Myers-Briggs, um, and of course Enneagram, which is the best tool. I think you and I would agree on this, that it is the best tool to create self-awareness and a growth path. Not just like, okay, well, I know my top 5 strengths are learner, analytical, self-assured, developer, responsibility. That's great. But as an Enneagram 5 subtype 1-to-1 with a 4 and a 9 in my makeup, that gives me really good clarity for growth. And okay, where are my fixations? Where are the things that I lean on too much? And how do I be aware of that and grow out of that? So, those assessments can be very helpful to understanding parts of who you are.
Right. And I would say too, think of it not as something that is labeling you or putting you in a box, but it's something to help you get out of the box, especially the Enneagram assessment too, because it's actually kind of lifting the lid of the box that you may have inadvertently put yourself in, because it provides so many different tools and different pathways with the wings and the lines, pathways to grow. So that way you actually move into higher levels of integration to become a healthier, wholer self. And also, if you're skeptical about assessments, take what you want from it. Take the assessment, kind of sift through it, figure out what resonates, throw out the stuff that doesn't resonate. Just because you get a certain result, it doesn't mean that you have to 100% wholeheartedly say, yes, this is me. Talk about it with a coach, talk about it with your personal board of directors, your trusted friends, your mentors. And, if there's pieces of it that you feel like, yeah, this doesn't describe me that well, then you know what, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, when I go to prep somebody to initially go through their integrative Enneagram 9 report, it's like, look, not all of this is going to be accurately true about you,
Right.
and as long as we verify that your type is correct, then let's like keep what we need to and get rid of the rest. So also I thought of 5 love languages. Kolbe, Kolbe is another one that's really good. And ultimately Jamie's probably going to talk a little bit more about this later, but you know imagine like you're sitting in a safe place and you're peaceful, you're at 100% peace, and love shows up to you. True, pure love shows up to you. And imagine the fears that you're holding on to, the things that are keeping you up at night, are concerning you right now, and you envision them in your hands. What do they sound like? What do they look like? How do they feel? Are they heavy? Are they light? And you give that to love. And what does love do with that? And what does it give you in return? And who does love say you are? Right. I've done that exercise myself, led people through it, and Jamie's done it thousands of times. And it's fascinating, the things that happen when you go through that type of exercise, and what happens to the fears and worries that you have, and the similarities that people have around what happens. And, if you can get in touch with true, um, pure love, and that reflects back to you who you are, that's probably a good starting place to say, okay, what is that identity? And then the last thing I'll say is community is going to be really important to understanding who you are. The people that know you best are able to reflect you back to you. And usually when we're authenticating or validating an Enneagram assessment, I'll say, hey, show this to your partner, your spouse, and just see what they say. Do they say it's true or not? And have them help in that process, because a lot of times, especially with Enneagram, there's this eek factor, like, I don't really like that, and I want to deny that. I want to be this one, not that one. I don't like this one, but yeah, it's probably true that it is,
That's
and then your
probably who
partner
you are.
spouse could verify it, right?
Right.
So, all right. Anything else that you? Oh, I'll say this too. Look, I'd love to offer you a here's steps 1 through 5. You find your identity on step 5, but I'm gonna be honest. Don't if somebody tells you that, I would question how accurate and how good. I mean, it will help you uncover some things, but your identity pathway and journey is really yours, and there are things you can do to help uncover that. And yet, it's there's no 1 to 5 steps, 1 to 5 to that. Would you agree with
Yeah,
that,
there's no
Adrian?
one size fits all. There's no prescribed journey. I think the most important thing in the whole process is to be curious and to have a desire to
Mm,
want to know yourself and to be committed to uncovering that and to growing, both so you can show up as a leader and so you can show up as your best possible self for the people in your life.
hmm. So we're at that time. We're going to offer a challenge to you. I'm going to offer it. So one of the ways that you can actually really kind of get to know your identity and what you operate from is your core values. What are those few values that no matter what are non-negotiable? And one of the best ways to do that is to start with a list of values and narrow it down from around 150 to 200 values all the way down to your top 5 if you can. And I know people listening won't be able to see this, but I've got mine right here. It's a little washed out, but I've got my top 8 right on my desk. And that is incredibly helpful to understand who are you, because when you understand, hey, family is one of my top values, being with them both quality and quantity of time, that's part of who I am, I'm not going to violate that. That's going to help me make decisions around what I say yes or no to and what involvement. So that'll be on our website. Go ahead and check that out at theoverflowinglife.com. And please, as always, connect with us on Instagram or email us your questions, and we would love to get those. Any last parting thoughts, Adrian?
You did great, Chris.
So did you. I appreciate having you as a partner. All right, y'all. Until next time.
Bye.